Is it from your computer, Sharon? Did it get, it's good? I don't hear myself now. Okay, we will, okay, I didn't do that. All right, number one, routine matters. A, calling meeting to order and verify quorum present through a roll call. Secretary Wells, you do the roll call.
President Taskey.
Present.
Ms. Atlas. Is she on? Ms. Montoya. Mr. Stoll.
He's right there, he's speaking. We can't hear him, but he's speaking.
And myself. Sounds like we have 3 present.
Yeah, 3 present to make quorum. Oh, okay, we can be heard on that. Thank you, everybody. I know it's not on the schedule, but if I could ask Mr. Wells to do invocation, a prayer.
Our kind Heavenly Father, humbly as we bow before thee in this time, we thank you for the opportunity to meet here together this morning. We thank you for the opportunity to be represented and served. And ask thy blessings to be here with us this day, that you might have thy spirit to be with us, to guide us and direct us in our actions, in our speech, and as we go through and work through the issues that we are here for. There are many things that thou hast blessed us with and bestowed upon us, we give you thanks. These things we say humbly in the thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Secretary Wells. We will move on to the next item, which is number 2, reports. With letter A, starting with letter A, Washington Hill Week. Ms. Chappelle?
Good morning, board, staff, superintendent. Thank you for this opportunity to present on the Hill Week activities. I guess this needs to be pretty close, right? What is Cody's board title? So roughly a week. So roughly a testing.
about now? How about now? Still an echo. But if I talk softer, it's not so bad. So bad. We apologize to anybody listening. This is brand new in this room, so we do have lots of tech folks who are going to work on this and get rid of the echo. So that listen to the one you see. Don't look that way.
Okay.
How about now?
Yeah, it's a little bit better.
So it was last week, right? So last week, Board President Haskey and I attended the National Indian Education Association Hill Week. And for those of you that don't know what that means, they give really great updates on the status of various issues regarding primarily funding issues, and then there's an opportunity to go talk about our local issues with our delegations, so the New Mexico delegation and the Arizona delegation. At the start of the conference, they asked me to help present a panel on advocacy, which was a really great idea. And so I think in the coming years, they're going to expand that and have more opportunities, kind of on a workshop style, for folks to understand how to effectively lobby Congress. So I'm going to jump to some of the speakers that were really instrumental in kind of forging some of our thought process that we're going to share today for your all's consideration. The first speaker that really kind of piqued curiosity was Senator Mullins from Oklahoma, who is, I believe, Cherokee. And what he was talking about was that due to the federal trust responsibility, Indian education funding should be mandatory and not discretionary. And so the reason that's so important for us at CCSD is that we have several funding streams, and Bellamy can definitely help us understand some of these issues with respect to like impact aid, for example, and for non-public schools, ISAP, JOM also falls into this category. We're not ever sure if we're going to get fully funded for impact aid in the year that it's due, or if we will be fully funded for impact aid. Just a quick factoid, we believe that the impact aid formula, one, is out of date, but two, routinely since the 60s has been underfunded, and right now that's at about $3 billion a year that it is underfunded. So what that means is, even though we had a really great victory on getting the state to give us 100% of our impact aid dollars, what that ultimately means is that we're still not getting the same amount of dollars as we would nationally when you compare that to other students. The other issue with having impact aid and the other funds I mentioned, part of the discretionary funding source, is that you can never actually rely on when the funds are going to come in. And what that means is it's very difficult when you can't rely on when those funds are going to come in, or the amount of those funds, to build actual programs that are aimed at the fund's goals, right? So if you had those funds up front, then you could plan for the whole year and you could actually grow programs year after year. What we have to deal with is we're constantly playing catch up. When the funds do become available, then we have find ways to spend them. And the problem with that is because sometimes they come late in the year with JOM in particular, then it becomes crunch. And so oftentimes what happens is a lot of those funds get set back because schools just can't actually get those dollars spent from a reimbursement perspective in enough time. Does that make sense so far? And so what Senator Mullins was talking about very emphatically was that all of these issues would be taken care of, obviously, if this was mandatory funding, meaning not part of the government shutdown threat every single year. And that the other aspect with JOM is that we would need to change the legislation so that it's forward funding instead of on a reimbursement basis. I apologize for that. The next speaker that was really instrumental was Congresswoman Hageman from Wyoming, and she currently sits as chair on the subcommittee for Native American Affairs, and that's a subcommittee of the Education Committee. And she had a lot of really great points similar to Mullins about federal trust responsibility and actually making sure that those funds get to students and school districts rather than kind of getting absorbed from an administrative bureaucratic standpoint in the various either federal or state agencies that oversee those funds. Suzette and I had an opportunity to visit with her separately the day before we had the rest of our, I apologize, President Haskell and I had the opportunity to visit with her. I think we were in probably an hour or so. She's extremely dynamic and very action-oriented. So when we gave her kind of the overview of our issues, our demographics, what's going on with plant closure, the fact that we had to fight for 100% of impact aid, the huge increase in our student homelessness rates to 700% after closure of San Juan Generating Station, those all really piqued her interest. And she had a really great back and forth with us in which she said, you know what, we really need more awareness of these issues, especially at the education committee level, so that we can start looking at how do we streamline these issues, how do we change legislation. And so her thought process was that we would start convening some meetings with key stakeholders at the federal level to start helping them understand these issues, and that ultimately what she would like to help us do is to get hearings going to start talking about these issues. So of course we were very excited about that, and it helped us further craft our messaging to our delegation both on the Arizona and the New Mexico side, and so I'm going to go into that here in next. So when we went with, our group had Doty membership on it, it had Navajo Prep, and it had Mr. Johnson, the Natani Nez board president, and so we were able to kind of talk about public school issues, but also BIE and grant school issues. And right now, something of huge importance for us is a lot of other schools that are not public schools want a piece of our impact aid pie because they're not getting enough in ISEP dollars. And that's a really huge concern because we're already underfunded by about $3 billion a year on impact aid. So what we've been doing for the past 2 years now actually is to really advocate that we shouldn't be competing over the same dollars. What we really need to do is grow the pot of money that we're all competing for. So that way all kids are on the same level playing basis and are getting the funds needed to actually support education in schools like ours. And so when we spoke with our, mostly the staff, but we did meet with some congressional folks, I was actually really surprised how little their Native American analyst designees and even their education analysts did not know or understand about these issues, even from New Mexico, even from Arizona. And so, for example, with the Kennedy report, none of them had heard about the Kennedy report, knew what it was, or knew that, in the last 50 years, really no momentum has been generated to change that, to change those gaps. I mean, there is some movement, but by and large, there's another report out with about 285 recommendations, and none of those have been implemented. So from, I guess, the momentum of these conversations, and then I'll turn it over to President Haskey, what I walked away with was some really great, I mean, not just ideas, but strategy and even feedback and buy-in from those delegations that want to actually support us on a bipartisan level to go after mandatory funding, to make JOM forward funding instead of reimbursement basis, and to really start diving into these concerns on equity and a level playing field from a funding standpoint. And then, of course, we had a lot of off-time discussion with other interested groups. The director from Arizona, for example, for Native American Affairs at their PED, and started really strategizing and creating alliances on how would we go after mandatory funding, and how might we start chipping away and creating momentum just like we did with Impact Aid. Also talked to them obviously about, yes, it's great that we have 100% of our Impact Aid dollars right now, but because of plant closure, that's not really going to help us as much as we needed it to fix historic issues. And so the other piece of that ask from our delegations was, we're going to need your help to fix legacy issues, especially on the capital side with facilities, because even though we now have 100%, it's not going to stretch very far. And with that, I turn it over to Board President Haskey and then stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Chappelle, for recapping on that, summarizing our visit. The takeaway from me, I met a lot with the Arizona delegation. The takeaway from our visits was that we really have to be solution-oriented, and in terms of tribally controlled schools, grant schools, other schools, those are potentially could be our feeder schools, our kids too. So not looking at them as other, somebody that's not like us. We have to kind of change our thinking in terms of how we're viewing these students. These students could potentially be our students too. So, and then we did really push to, I guess, increase the size of the pot, and our thinking in terms of how these issues are affecting us has to change a little. We have to get more solution oriented and start looking at ways to educate everybody. I mean, our community members, you'd be surprised how many community members go to Washington. We sat at the table with a lot of them. So we, as staff here, as community members with CCSD, we really have to educate ourselves on some of these issues and be able to speak to those issues for the betterment of our students. So it was a really good visit. I was hoping that somebody would be going to NAFIS to also do that message, but I don't think we have anybody going. And we stand for questions if you have any questions or comments, board members.
I have no questions.
No questions? Any questions or comments, board member So?
No, I don't have any questions at this time. Although I did notice in the President's State of the Union, one of the things that he did address was that he was interested in raising teacher pay for all teachers across the United States. So maybe that has impact on the upcoming, the President's budget for teaching through the U.S. Department of Ed, or maybe that's going to be through other funding sources. So maybe that's something that Ms. Chappelle or other people can look at. Is he did make that statement in the State of the Union. That's at least what I caught. In addition to some of the other meetings that you guys were on.
Thank you, Board Member So. And that was a point that was brought up actually in all of our meetings. Because New Mexico has raised teacher pay, it's actually creating disparity on teacher pay for non-public schools on the reservation. And they're finding it really difficult to compete. And they're worried, of course, that their teachers are actually going to leave to come work for public schools. So that's a really good point, Board Member So. Thank you for raising that.
Go ahead.
And I think the other thing is the continuing resolution that's currently in place, because I know a lot of the U.S. Department of Ed funding, did that come up in some of the conversations? Because I know that the budget has been blocked by Republicans, and that's the other big concern. Because I know a lot of our federally our federal money is tied into U.S. Department of Ed, so that's some of the other concerns.
Yes, thank you, Board Member So. And we did address those concerns and issues. In particular, we indicated that because of those fights, we really wanted our funding from Department of Ed to be mandatory instead of discretionary, so that it wouldn't get caught up in those fights.
Board member Montoya.
So just in regards to the impact aid, and everybody understands and knows what we've been dealing with for the past, going on now 43 years. And to Ms. Chappelle's point of getting the 100%, that's all well and good, but we're making up for those 43 years of not having that funding, which means not just that we're behind the ball, we're way back behind the ball and trying to play catch up. And utilizing that funding in a manner that, let's say Gallup, I've said this before, Gallup gets to use their impact aid funding a lot different than we can, and how we have to apply it. And yet that's not taken into consideration at the federal level, to my point of every year that I've gone there and tried to champion on behalf of getting full funding and reoccurring funding and direct funding, for that matter, to the school districts. So it's important for everybody to understand that. And again, even with that continuing resolution for funding, if they can't decide on what they're going to do with funding for the federal government, that means, again, impact aid is directly impacted as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Board Member Montoya, and it reminded me of another issue we did address, and that is how difficult it is to actually be eligible and comply with the impact aid funding formula requirements. and that means that in order to qualify for the impact aid funds, literally every child that lives on the reservation has to be quantified. And so it's kind of like the census in a way. Chapter house officials have to certify that child actually lives on the reservation. And I believe the requirement hasn't changed, that has to be in person. And so it's not just looking at a roster, for example, of chapter membership, or the family address. It is in person. So they have to physically drive to every single house in order to get qualification for those impact aid funds. And that is an unfunded mandate. The chapter houses have no reimbursement from federal public ed, for example, for the miles and gas and time that it takes to do that. And so We also did advocate and ask that be looked at and to be able to be streamlined. There's a lot of ideas out there on how to do that. But to your point, Board Member Montoya, that was another issue that we raised as well. Thank you.
Also, have we been given any information about what the president's budget is going to be with regard to funding on the federal side? That's the other question.
The Green Book, board member, so the Green Book comes out on March 11th. So that should indicate what the priorities are for this coming fiscal year.
Yeah, because I think the Office of Management and Budget has released, they've at least put together some of the executive branch budget summaries. So that should give us an idea like how much money there is going to be for Title I, Title II, Title IV, Title VI, and all these other federal budget priorities. Did they provide that information at that meeting?
No, that at the meeting that we were at, they didn't have information at that level. But what I would recommend to the board is that we put together kind of a subcommittee or task force, that core team that starts looking at these issues, because given the bipartisan support for mandatory funding, it's a huge opportunity that that I would recommend we try to take advantage of.
I agree. Can you hear me? Are there any additional comments or questions? Okay, go ahead.
Just hearing the conversation and what was presented, and I just want to provide some history here that, a political party was mentioned, but also the opposite party, Democrats, with their ETA agenda, and which is their energy transition. That's what led us to these, to researching our impact aid. And I do want to share that because of the closures and the continuing threat, and then failed promises on projects such as the solar projects. I believe there was 3 of them that were supposedly promised, and 1 is underway, but the other 2 haven't started, and that's 3 years later. And so the credits, the revenue, or what was supposed to make CCSD whole is still not there, and is still being sought. So that's what led us into exploring and researching more about impact aid. And in a way, it's a blessing, because then we got to see what the deficiencies are, and what we need to continue working and advocating for.
I have a comment.
Go ahead. Go.
Ms. Aspis, I truly appreciate that, because there's a lot of people that don't fully understand that those initiatives at the national level directly impact the initiatives within the state. And as we have seen, those decisions and choices, quite frankly, that's what they are, have directly impacted our kids and made us more reliant upon that impact aid funding. And again, I spoke a little earlier to how we have to use that differently than Gallup does or some of our neighbors. We don't have the luxury of having that additional funding. And again, especially over the past 40 plus years of using it and applying it in a different manner than other school districts have. So the point that you have brought up is absolutely right on, and I appreciate the fact that you did that, because there's people out in the general public, without in the communities, that don't understand that. And time again, I'm having to educate people about those processes and those decisions that are made. We had one of our biggest revenue collectors here in the county for our school district that has gone away. And the second one is being threatened to do the same. promises are made and promises are broken. So people need to understand that. The people in this room need to understand that. The people out in the communities need to understand that, what we're facing. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Ms. Hospice.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additional comments or questions? Okay, go ahead, Ms. Chappelle.
That did remind me of an exchange we had with the staff from Congressman Heinrich's office. And so for the most part, all of the other folks who visited on were extremely interested and caring about these issues. The only office that actually kind of pushed back on this was Senator Heinrich's staff. And so in response to the concerns that job training, new jobs, those kinds of things haven't been implemented in the Four Corners region like promised, what was said was, well, they should just temporarily move to Albuquerque and Espanola, where the training centers are. And so, yeah, that made me a little feisty. I promise I was still a professional, but I pushed back pretty hard on that, and talked about how difficult that is, and how that's actually very damaging for kids. So anyway, I did just want to say that part, because while we did get really good feedback and encouragement, that taught me that we still have work to do in helping folks understand that a family who no longer has a job can't just move their entire family to Albuquerque or Espanola. And, you know, then her pushback was, well, there aren't really, there's a shortage of workers up there, and that know how to build things. And I said, well, no, these are actually highly qualified workers who have built things and problem solved from a mechanical and technical standpoint on power plants for their entire careers. So no, we have a highly skilled workforce, one. And two, San Juan College and the School of Energy does an excellent job in helping with worker training and retraining. So, I mean, I'm hoping that maybe with some of that pushback, and if we follow up on it, that we can kind of change some of those minds. But it is unfortunate that was the mindset, at least at that office.
I think to that point, can you hear me? Okay, there it is. I think to that point, there was a lot of people that we had discussions with in these conversations didn't understand the demographics, the challenges that we had in our school district. I think it gave us an opportunity to educate the people that we were talking to. Unlike where they come from, we had challenges of the lack of running water, electricity, long distance drives, road conditions, and so forth. So it was a really good opportunity for us to sit down and have that conversation. It's not going to take once or twice, but I think as we continue to have these conversations, we'll continue to push on the challenges that we have. But out of the big takeaway was we do have a lot of things to work on, but we also have to be solution oriented. We have to come up with solutions that would work in our school district that we can have. There was one meeting that we came to that one of our partners brought in a huge booklet of asks, of requests, and provided the people, the congressional aides, with that book and said, okay, these are what we want. There weren't any solutions, there weren't any recommendations, and that was a huge area where they said, when you're coming, the recommendation was, when you're coming to the table to have these conversations, it's really good to have some solutions already, possible solutions to help remedy their challenges. So that's, I think, in light of everything, I think we really have to become more solution oriented.
May I respond to that?
Yes, go ahead.
I appreciate that, and sitting here listening, again, as you all know, been in those conversations. The last time I was there, I can honestly say I almost made some of their people cry because of the stories that we had to tell. Literally, they were sitting there and you could see the water in their eyes, which to me is a disconnect to the human being that's sitting on the other side of it that doesn't get it. You show up with solutions, you tell them and you give them suggestions and ask or whatever the hell they want to call it, but quite frankly, they have an agenda and they're going to stick to it, and they just quite frankly don't care, with all due respect to them. Because if they did, they would be pushing harder. And that's the problem that I have with them. It's all talk. Every single time, it's the same story that I go and give to them. And again, it's, with all due respect to the people that sit in those offices, I know there's some wonderful human beings. However, they don't see and feel what we do. Thank you.
And to those points, the other side of that, right, is we really need to collect some better data so that when we are trying to come up with those solutions, we can quantify why this is a problem. So, that's the next question they ask. Show me the numbers and show me how the solution you're bringing addresses these numbers. So I would definitely recommend, Superintendent, that we kind of brainstorm on some data points and a way to get those across before we go back, quite frankly.
Go ahead.
May I offer a solution or a suggestion as a solution to the problem? And I think I said this probably about a year and a half ago, to invite them here, all of them, every last single one of them, into this room, so we can drive them out there on the roads, take them to the schools, take them to Newcomb Elementary, Newcomb Junior High, see the cracks in the walls, the doors at the high school in Newcomb, and to feel and talk to these kids right here.
And we did do that, and many of them said, yeah, we'd like to do that. So I think that's a great idea.
We got the contact information to make the appointments.
Yeah, no, I've suggested that to them before about coming out. And again, every single one of them, even the state representatives, have one big party here and take them out to the schools.
I told them they're going to have to ride one of the school buses without air conditioning. They didn't really like that, but I said, you want the experience?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Vice President Aspis.
So I agree with that, and I was going to mention how I got some feedback before from our board attorney, Chappelle, and she talked about how during her presentation, she asked how many in the room had read or even know about the Kennedy report, and as somebody connected with, especially with Native schools, majority Native, they should acquaint themselves to that report because nothing has changed, and that I believe was written or put together back in '67, and so that is, I mean, even just the forward start of that report is powerful, and so with that, that was the last time we had state representatives, senators, that came down and actually went to schools, actually went to homes, and visit with Navajo and Pueblo, and that's what comprises Kennedy report. So it would be a good idea to have that happen at this date and time, and even take them to the local mutton stand, and you know, to really get a feel of what our children, how we, you know, our daily lives. But then again, as mentioned about work, about, you know, being, to me, that's somebody with no heart that's saying, you know, to move elsewhere, you know, and that jobs or training is provided in the cities. And sometimes I think that maybe that's the goal, that's the ultimate goal, is to get us from rural to cities. But one thing that's, you know, overlooked is we talk about cultural, we talk about traditions, and you know, I've heard that same question asked over at NCAI, that how come they just can't move? And a lot of them don't know that traditional Navajos, they bury their umbilical cord near home. And so that's home. And so there's that connection, and they'll go without running water, they'll go without electricity because of that.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Or comments? You have to hold it.
Yeah, we
have to bring it until it turns on.
Hold it to the screen.
Good morning. I'm Amanda Sutherland, and I'm the Director of Support Services. And I just wanted to add to what you were saying. I just attended last week the PED Special Education Directors Meeting, and we have Dr. Cage and Dr. Deputy Director Jenkins, and they're both from Louisiana. And I had the opportunity to have lunch with them, and I told them that they should come, not only because to see New Mexico and our beautiful area here, but also to take a bus ride, come and see our students and the demographics that we work with, because I truly don't believe people understand the vastness of it all. So I just wanted to let you know that I did that. And I hope that they take us up on that. They acted genuine, and so I'm hoping that they'll come.
Good, great, thank you. The more the merrier.
Matt, yeah,
Yes.
to that point, I appreciate that, because every time I get in front of those people, I try to do the same thing. And with my wife and I, we travel a lot, and we drive the vast majority of it to the places that we go. Southern Mississippi, Louisiana. We up by the place, I think it was in Mississippi, where they had that recent tornado, and the trees were still on top of the houses. You can see the swath where it cut through there. We stop and talk to the people to get a sense and feel of human beings and their lives and what they deal with. And inner city of Cincinnati, New York, Manhattan, the Bronx, you name it, been there, done that. Up in the hills of Kentucky, visiting with the hillbillies, no joke, seriously. And again, to get a feel of the human beings and what they're dealing with. And that's one thing that, as people, we don't do, especially those that are in positions of authority or power, to go out and actually talk to people and understand. They do it from afar, sometimes with binoculars. I think I see them. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm Candace Thompson, Director of Operations. Last night, I just returned from a conference in Santa Fe, and it was green schools. We know we're going in that direction in the future, but it's hard to explain to people from urban areas, California, Washington, New York, Chicago, the Carolinas, our struggles that we have here. The trend right now is an all-electric school. Well, that's great, but where does that power come from? We're a community that has been devastated by that action with the closure of our plants and stuff. And we know we're gonna have to go in that direction, but we're not there yet. I was visiting with a dealer from Bluebird Buses looking at an electric bus. In ideal conditions, going downhill, no air conditioner, no heating, we can get 120 miles out of that bus. And it has to charge for 8 hours. So that's not an option for us yet in our area. And the gentleman I was speaking to, he's familiar with this area. He's not ever visited here, but he's aware of the circumstances that we have here. And he said, I would not sell you a bus at this time because I would be setting you up for failure. And I thanked him for his honesty. But there are things that we can do in the short term to achieve, saving energy and going towards green, such as LED lighting upgrades, controlling the usage of our lights, our HVAC units. There are things that we can do, but it's really hard to set. I think I told Mr. Carlson, I was a square peg trying to fit in a round hole because I see the whole thing because it's impacted our district so much. Where does that electricity come from? The cost of electricity is going up every single day. How is that benefiting school districts? How is that helping us with our budgets when our budgets are being cut? So it was very enlightening and kind of frustrating because some people are not looking at the whole picture. I call it, they're drinking the Kool-Aid right now and just jumping on board without thinking about replacement batteries on the buses, $10,000 a battery. There's 14 batteries in a bus. That's $140,000 to replace batteries in that bus. Then where did the batteries get disposed of? We're talking about going green. How much is it going to cost me to dispose of those batteries? So, I had a lot of questions because I know Mr. Carlson were asked, are you guys going to go down that path? The answer is not at this time because we'd be setting ourselves up for failure. Failure is very costly.
May I?
Quick question, real.
Just,
Yes, sir.
a lot of people at this table don't realize that for the past 2 years, I've been on that legislative committee for the New Mexico School Board Association. And each time I've had the distinct honor of shooting down green bills that certain school districts want us to support. And I've convinced the whole of the committee, or the vast majority, obviously, to not accept it because of the points that she's talking about, because of the reality, because of the failure, because of the cost of that failure. And I will every single time go down there and do that to have the opportunity to tell them no and convince them not to do it. Now, there was a bill, if I'm not mistaken, that gives them the choice and the option to do that. That passed, correct? Okay. And that was one thing that I had mentioned when they posed these two other bills that came out of Las Cruces and APS, that there's already federal funding grant money to do it. If you want to do it, do it. If you have the capacity to do it, do it. But quit forcing it on the school districts that just can't at this point in time. We can't. Because exactly what she's saying, the costs and the utility of these things are not worth the investment at all. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Complete agreement. I don't think it's even just the costs. I mean, when you look at our area, we already have, in the paper it said over a third, 40% of our population doesn't have running water and electricity. Where did they propose that we get the electricity to put energy in our vehicles? It just doesn't, to me, it just doesn't make sense. So, go ahead, Vice President Aspis.
Board President Haskey, That's an excellent point that you make. And as we build and plan for the new school down there, there has been a change to the International Building Code about installing an EV charging station in all projects. I'm asking for a waiver on it, on our new school in Newcomb. Number one, it's not a public. Oops, there we go, sorry. We don't just allow any stranger to come on our campus and charge their vehicle. Then again, there's the procurement aspect of it. We can't give that away for free. How do we charge? How does this work? So yesterday, I was actually on the phone with PSFA asking for a variance in this construction project that we're doing right now. So I don't know if we'll get it, but we're definitely gonna push for it and ask for it.
Good, that would be good.
Quick question, Candace, just to bring your points out a little more. My understanding is that the more you use batteries, the less life cycle they have. Did they talk about the life cycles of those batteries? As President Haskell is handing you batteries?
So, what we talked about on the
There's one right there nobody's using.
it didn't have the back on it, the battery was falling out. So we did talk about the batteries and the charging, and it's ironic that the batteries do not charge well when the temperature is under 20 degrees. You have to preheat the fluid in the batteries to, I believe it's 70, 75 degrees is the optimal temperature that the batteries will start accepting a charge. And then they have to charge a full 8 hours
At that temperature.
at that temperature. So
So that takes more energy because you
it
have to
takes
heat.
more energy. You can do they call it a quick charge. And no, we do not have the infrastructure to support the requirement of power to do a quick charge, which a quick charge, I believe, is 5 hours. But then that bus must then be charged a full 8 to 12 hours for optimal performance in the batteries.
I'm glad you said that because that's probably one of the most important points that I made at that legislative committee was the lack of infrastructure, not just on our part as a school district, but as our providers can't give that to us. I mean, look how hard it was for them to find even a transformer to provide that service to begin with and the upgrade they'd have to have even to keep that up. We don't have that.
Well, and I would imagine that we're talking road miles, highway miles, when you're talking optimal performance.
Correct.
You're not talking potentially getting stuck in mud or snow and burning up a lot of electricity to try to get out of that. So I would, be a little suspicious of the distance that can go in those conditions.
And that's, Ms. Chappelle, you bring up a good point. Dulce just had their first EV bus delivered last week. So I'm interested to see how that's going to work for them. There is talk and discussion. If something happens with the bus, you can't even drive the bus from Dulce to Albuquerque. They are either going to have to tow it to Cuba, unload it in Cuba, and drive it to Albuquerque, or drive it to Cuba and load it on a trailer and take it to Albuquerque to have the bus serviced. So I look forward to seeing how that is going to work for them. Of course, they used a lot of government rebates. The cost of an electric bus is $400,000.
And-
A cost, and that's a route bus. A cost of a route bus to us, a diesel route bus to us, is about $129,000. And diesel energy is getting cleaner and cleaner every day. Because electric buses do have emissions also. So,
What is the life cycle of one of our buses typically?
I believe we have 12 years. We life cycle them out at 12 years.
So my understanding is that those batteries have to be replaced at least every 5 years.
5 to 8 years, depending on the conditions in which. Yes.
So you're not looking at just 400,000, you're looking at potentially 600,000 to 700,000 per bus, including the batteries. Not including maintenance and all the other stuff.
Right.
Yes, ma'am?
Just thank you. Okay, is that better? Look at you, it's buzzing. So I'm just curious if there's a optimal amount. Mr. Carlson, Leandro, and I we're math teachers. It just reminds me X plus Y equals some number, right? So I wonder, like, maybe with our local smaller routes, like within Kirtland, within Shiprock proper, right, within Newcomb, I wonder if there's an optimal amount, mileage that we can do. Because I agree that the longer routes, right, it's not feasible, but like within the town of Kirtland, I wonder if there's that flexibility, because I think there's just so many dollars out there right now for it. But maybe, I don't know if there's a study out there that we can look at, or I hate to add more to Carol's plate, but if Carol could look into that, if there's an amount where it would be beneficial for the district. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Aspis.
So, I'm gonna start with Candace. You talked about how this was brought up and at one of the meetings you attended, and I'm so happy that you yourself is taken upon, looking at this issue and not just, like you said, going blindly into it and agreeing. That's what we need for our district. If you know that things are, especially with cost, budget, that we're not just buying into it just because PED wants to, and we're gonna have to do some pushback, at department levels, not just at board level. And so I'm really glad to hear that. And then again, as we talk about renewables and solar, I'm all for it. I mean, I myself would like to not have a utility bill, but that's what they get you with. They say free this, free that, and then most people don't know that most of this stuff is subsidized, as you said, by federal government. What happens when that when it goes away? And then that's not the maintenance, that's just the purchasing of it. And so there's legislation coming forward. I heard this like some years ago from California, between solar customers and regular utility. These solar customers, I'm talking about residential, they have for years and years gotten away with free cost to their utilities. And some of that power that they make does go back into their city or their grid. But what's happening, who's paying for the nuts and bolts and the maintenance repairmen you know, the labor costs and the parts costs. And then the grid itself and the poles, the upkeep, the utility, the ones that haven't gone to solar. So now there's legislation from California that they're talking about coming up with a fee for these solar people. So nothing is free. They'll never have free. They always want something in return. And so, and then, you know, as Deswood was talking about the shorter routes using the bus compared to the cost, as you said, 400,000 for a bus. Why would we want to do that? And you know, I had the privilege of last year I went to, we had our national school board conference in or 2 years ago in San Diego, and I went there, and so my bearing was giving me issues, so I ended up going to a Ford company, and the salesman, as my bearing was getting fixed, the salesman took me over to one of the electric cars and was trying to sell it to me, and then and nowhere, had I not asked where the bank of batteries were, he would have never shown me. And until I asked, and then he pulls up the trunk and there they are. There's like 5 batteries back there. So I asked him, what's the cost and when that fails? And I wanted to see how much he would tell me. And I said, what's the price on that? And he says, oh, I say about 5,000. And I looked at him, I said, no, it ain't. That's about 14,000, 17,000 right there. And then he says, then he was talking about his truck and how his bank of batteries had failed. And so he bought his replacement for 5,000. So I told him, I said, what'd you do, steal it? And then he says, no, actually, I got it at a salvage yard. 5,000, who has 5,000, you know, for that kind of maintenance? And then, so they don't tell you the full story, and then that brings to mind that, you know, as history has, you know, we're going down this other road, and I've heard a board member say before, why are we having to talk about these industries, about this, the closures? And then I'm looking at him like, how do we not? This is related to us, and this is part of our funding. Where's the money tree then? You know, you tell me where the money tree is, and I couldn't see how he couldn't make that connection, but now it brings to mind that a lot of times PED, or you know, you get these I guess, you know, as Candace, whatever conference she went to, you get these presentations and trying to win over certain departments over to, and I'm just glad there was pushback and a lot of questions asked. And so I think as a district, we all need to start attending and start learning more about solar. And then as we're talking about the conditions needed for charging, a lot of these fires that happen, that you hear about and they don't tell you, is that it's related to undercharge, not overcharge. So, you know, with the lack of fire departments out here, you know, how are we gonna
And
They said you have
Yeah.
to submerge the whole vehicle into water to be able to put it out when it's electric car.
so I was gonna say, you just can't spray water on it.
No, you can't. You have to immerse the whole thing, submerge the whole vehicle. Yep, you have to smother it.
Smother it with foam.
Go ahead, Secretary Wells.
If we were to go, electric, I about lost it. If we were to go electric, even for rural areas, we would limit ourselves in usage, because I'll bet if you ask Cindy, is that her name? If how many times she has to swap out buses, in order to make connections, in order to make routes, picking up students. Sometimes you have a bus that won't start in the morning, or something goes down with it, and you have to swap it out. Well, if all you got left is a, excuse my language, is a stupid electric bus that you drive around Shiprock or Kirtland area, and your longer route buses are, for whatever reason, incapacitated, you have nothing to substitute them with. This idea, to me, is ludicrous. And we have the energy. Why can't we use it? Why don't we manufacture? We know how it works. It's all a political game, and I don't think we ought to be playing it or promoting into it.
I'd like to piggyback off of Mr. Wells' comments.
Go ahead.
I think we had a fine example, not just recently back east, when they got hit by that cold weather snap and rendered all those electric vehicles useless. I mean, it's what more of an example do you need? And then you take that and you put it into a rural setting. In Dulce? Really? Out in Newcomb or Notch City, where we don't have the infrastructure to provide? I mean, if individuals in this room want to try it, I guess we can give the superintendent an electric vehicle. Or the assistant superintendent electric vehicle, and let him put around. See how that works. I mean, it's all well, because I'm sure all of us here on the board or anybody in this room have gotten into an Uber vehicle that was an electric car, and they're wonderful when you have the infrastructure to provide. When? We don't, because that costs money. Who's going to give us that funding? Where does that come from? See, so we have much, much bigger problems than just plugging in a vehicle and driving down the road and hoping it works. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I just was renting a car just a couple of days ago too, and they gave me the option, a lower rate to rent an all-electric car. I was like, no, thank you. I don't have 8 hours to wait around for it to charge. So, are there any additional comments or questions, Ms. Chappelle?
The only thing I wanted to point out is just off of what Mr. Deswood was saying, is there is a lot of funding out there for these vehicles, but I would caution us, because it's actually taking dollars away that would actually otherwise come to schools. And so, for example, in House Bill 2, there were some funds set aside for electric school buses, quite a bit actually. And so I guess, what I'm hearing here is, at least with our school district, based on what we're hearing so far, is we'd rather that money go to help bridge gaps for our kids instead of buses we can't use. So that's just another, thought process too, that we may want to articulate when we're talking to our legislators.
One last comment.
Go ahead.
The wheels on the bus don't go round and round if you can't plug it in.
Good one. All right. If there aren't any other questions regarding letter A, is it letter A? Under reports, we'll move on to B again to Ms. Chappelle. Okay. We're asking for. We'll do a 7-minute break. We'll start right back at 10 o'clock. So please get your beverages, your fruits and vegetables, and whatever's over there. Thank you. No, 7 minutes. to, as soon as Ms. Chappelle is ready, that we will move on to item B under reports. Okay, Jermaine? We're waiting on you.
I'm glad it's not an elephant cookie.
Okay.
No.
Is your microphone on? Go ahead.
I know, I'm glad I can't see it.
Inside joke. I don't
Okay.
even know if you can hear me.
All right, so the next component is more on the state side. The first thing I'm going to start out with is we had discussed, probably a couple months ago, prior to the legislative session, that the Public Education Department was going to enact new regulations that would require 180 instructional days and would prohibit 4-day school weeks. So as you all recall, there was quite a bit of concern statewide on that. And we participated by providing the board's resolution opposing that as part of the public record. And then, of course, we gave a summary during the hearing. As of March 7th, yesterday, the Public Education Department has actually filed the new rule, but in response to public comment, they did revise it. So I'm going to give a quick overview of those revisions. And I understand from Superintendent Carlson that there are still a number of concerns, and so I'll turn that over to him here shortly. So the first thing they did is